Life Unrehearsed, brought to you by Lianas Senior Transition Support, helping you navigate home care and senior residences.
And good afternoon. Welcome to Life Unrehearsed. I'm Matt Delvecchio, specializing in home care, downsizing, and the senior living industry. Thanks for tuning in. Coming up on the first half of the show, the latest in frauds and scams. I have the Director of Financial Crimes at the Canadian Bankers Association to tell us about these scams, including a new twist to the grandparent scam. And we'll also be talking about fraud prevention techniques. I also want to hear from our listeners if they have been frauded. So I want you to call in. We're going to be opening up the lines after the 4:15 traffic update. So feel free to call me at 514-790-0800 or text me at 514-800. You can stay anonymous. This is all about informing our listeners about what you did in these fraud and scam situations. And on the second half of the show, I'm going to be interviewing an inspiring man who was told by doctors to update his will and papers. Could you imagine? After being diagnosed with multiple myeloma. That was 10 years ago, and Ron Drennan is still going strong. That's coming up after the 4:30 news. You know, in 2022, the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre received fraud and cybercrime reports totaling a staggering $530 million in victim losses. That's nearly a 40% increase from the unprecedented $380 million the year before. And unfortunately, the increase in financial loss isn't tied to an increase in reporting. The Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre estimates that only 5 to 10% of people actually report fraud. Well, to tell us more about these scams and prevention techniques, we have Mr. Adrian White, Director of Financial Crimes at Canadian Bankers Association. Adrian, welcome to Life Unrehearsed.
Thank you, Matt.
Well, thanks for taking some time here on a Sunday on and what seems to be an ever increasingly popular issue with all population and especially older adults. So what I'd like to do, Adrian, is if we can discuss some of the most common scams. And let's start with email fraud or phishing scams. What do we mean by that?
So, Matt, email fraud and phishing scams have been around since we started having email accounts. Essentially, they are offering via email some great benefit to you, or they're threatening you with something if you don't take action immediately, and usually involves providing money in one form or another.
Yeah, and you know, you mentioned it's that fear factor that seems to be driving. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, but let's continue with some of the scams that you're seeing as part of the Canadian Bankers Association. How about a very popular one, phone or voicemail scams?
So this is another popular way that criminals are trying to trick us by calling, using text messages, or leaving voicemails. And in these scams, you receive a call or a voicemail from a criminal who might be posing as a member of a government agency, law enforcement, or even your bank. You'll hear that there's an overdue balance or an outstanding debt, or there is a warrant out for your arrest. And they're trying to hook you into believing something bad is happening, and you have to do something urgently, usually pay money to fix it.
Again, using those fear tactics. And one we're hearing more and more about, it was actually big news here in Montreal, Adrian, is the grandparent scam. So how does that work?
Well, this is one of the most hurtful scams criminals are trying now to steal money from us. They call and actually pretend to be a loved one, like a grandchild, and convince us that they need our help urgently. And again, it will be a request for money in some form. So this is certainly on the increase.
Yeah, kind of scary. And you were mentioning in our pre-interview, Adrian, there's even a new twist going on about the grandparent scam. What is that?
Well, thanks for asking, Matt. Yeah, we're seeing as we become more aware and can defend against these the grandparent scams as they started, the criminals are upping their game and they're changing their tactics. So originally they might have been saying they're pretending to be the grandchild, saying that they've been arrested and need bail money, or they've been in a car accident and they need money to deal with the consequence of the accident. But now the criminals are pretending the grandchild has dropped their phone in the toilet to explain why they're calling from an unusual number and they need money quickly to repair or replace their cell phone. And they don't want to ask their parents because it's so embarrassing to have dropped an expensive phone in a toilet.
It's so interesting because things have changed in the telecommunications world, right, Adrian, where phones were usually included with your 2-year package. Now, what it is they're paying enormous amounts of money for a phone. I don't know if you're a parent, you bought a phone for your teenager or yourself, and they're upwards of $1,200, $1,400, $1,600. So now it kind of makes sense. They're switching their tune a little bit. Fell in the toilet. I mean, you've heard those stories. I need $1,500. I don't want to tell my parents. Can you help me out, Grandma, Grandpa?
Exactly, and it tugs on our heartstrings. It's like, well, of course they're going to help out my grandchild and not create further conflict with the parents for that very, very expensive phone that's on the plan.
Yeah. Listening to Life Unrehearsed, Matt Del Vecchio here, and I'm talking to Mr. Adrian White. He's the Director of Financial Crimes at the Canadian Bankers Association. Adrian, all right, there's a few of the most popular scams. Let's talk solutions. And what is the number one recommendation for our listeners to avoid being frauded?
Well, I think the best thing we can do is be suspicious of any urgent call, email, text, or voice message claiming to be from a trusted organization or individual. Don't provide any personal information that they may ask for. You don't really know who's asking. Don't respond immediately, and consult a trusted family member or a friend. Even better, have that discussion with your family before you become the potential victim of one of these scams.
I really like that idea. It seems so simple and straightforward. Have the discussion, but we're hearing it on the news, and as an adult children, sandwich generation, you're having the discussions perhaps with your children, if at all, but have those discussions with mom and dad as well, and spouses, and just have that discussion. Make them more aware of what's going on. And I love the fact that just be suspicious. Have your guard up. Nothing wrong with that. And specific, Adrian, when we're talking the grandparent scam, what can be done to help?
So if you do receive a call that appears to be from a grandchild, they'll often say, do you know who this is? You should say no. The criminals may know the names of your grandchildren from social media or other sources, but if you press the caller for details about things only you and your grandchild would know, you can usually catch them out and discover that it's a fraud. And have them repeat stories with details about circumstances of that urgent situation. They probably can't give you a really consistent story. And then just call their parents. Never provide your credit card number. Never wire money in response to the urgent situation. And if you are tricked by one of these scams, do report it to your local police and the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. Don't be embarrassed. We need to know the latest tactics that criminals are using so we can help others avoid becoming a victim as well.
It's so important. And like you said, don't be embarrassed. It's amazing. 5 to 10% of frauds are actually reported, meaning, over 90% of frauds might not even be reported. And it's for exactly what you're saying, Adrian. People are embarrassed to talk about it. But this is one of the reasons why, Life Unrehearsed is the name of the show. Things happen, how we can deal with it, and let's get the word out. And in fact, we want to hear from you, our listeners. After our traffic update, we're going to want to hear your stories. Let's get the word out. You could stay anonymous. Call us 514-790-0800 or text me at 514-800. Let's hear your story. Talking with Adrian White, Director of the Financial Crimes at Canadian Bankers Association. The Canadian Bankers Association, Adrian, have been doing so much work. I was amazed with the amount of material that's out there. And you've got fraud prevention toolkits, and one of them is specific for older adults. Can you tell us about it?
That's right. So we at the Canadian Bankers Association publish fraud prevention tips to help build awareness and resilience against the latest tactics that criminals are using. And we've put a lot of this material together in a toolkit which you can access through the internet, which goes into details about the scams, how they work, and how you can go through a checklist to protect yourself against the latest scams.
It is an amazing toolkit, and there's several, also cybersecurity and so on. Adrian, I really want to thank you for coming on Life Unrehearsed here on a Sunday. How can our listeners access that fraud prevention toolkit?
So if you go to our website at cba.ca, CanadianBankersAssociation.ca, just select fraud prevention or financial literacy sections, and you'll find the toolkit as well as other tips to guard against the most current frauds.
That's just excellent. Well, thank you very much for informing all our listeners, Adrian. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Matt, for starting the conversation, and I hope the conversation continues.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Adrian White, Director of Financial Crimes at Canadian Bankers Association. Coming up next, we want to hear from you. How about your scam or fraud stories? 514-790-0800 or text me at 514-800.
Life Unrehearsed, brought to you by Lianas Senior Transition Support, helping you navigate home care and senior residences.
And welcome back to Life Unrehearsed. Little Eurythmics. Matt Delvecchio here. I'm talking about the latest in frauds and scams. We just heard from Mr. Adrian White. He's the Director of Financial Crimes at Canadian Bankers Association. And just to repeat, a couple texts coming in. The CBA, the Canadian Bankers Association, has a couple of excellent fraud prevention toolkits, including one aimed at older adults. So just search CBA for Canadian Bankers Association, Fraud Prevention Toolkit. There's a few of them there, and they are excellent. Have you or someone you know been frauded? I want to hear your story. So let's get the word out to do a little protecting each other. You can stay anonymous, as you heard me perhaps before mention that the Anti-Fraud Center is claiming that only about 5 to 10% of actual frauds are being reported, simply because many Canadians are embarrassed of what's happened, and that number is far too much. So let's get the word out. If you or a friend have been frauded, caught up in a scam, I want to hear your story. Call me at 514-790-0800 or text me at 514-800. All right. I also posted this on the Life Unrehearsed Facebook page, and a couple stories have also come in. I want to start with my own story, and this happened to be credit card fraud, and it's happened to me on 2 different occasions. One was simply I was looking over my credit card bill, and there was a larger amount, I think it was $650 from a merchant in Europe. And I had no idea what that was. It wasn't in Europe, and very odd. But I only saw it once I got my bill. So I had called, in this case it was Visa, and they looked it up with me on the phone and asked me a bunch of questions. And sure enough, it was fraudulent. I had no idea what it was. They did reimburse me for the $600, but you could imagine how many of these frauds are going on and what it's costing these credit card companies. So that was one. And then more recently, almost embarrassed to say it, there was an $80 charge on a recent Visa statement that I saw, and it was odd. It was a merchant I didn't know, and I called Visa again, and they were questioning me on that, and they said, well, what about last month's $80 bill with the same merchant? And that's where I was a little embarrassed, because the month prior, I was rushing. I didn't look over line by line. I just paid the Visa. So those fraudsters thought, hey, look he paid that bill last month. We're going to try it again. And I caught the $80, a small amount. It was, probably an insignificant amount for many people. I saw the 80, and sure enough, it was the same fraudsters trying to get me the second month. So I guess I was red flagged. I went to buy a gift card for my son's birthday recently, and it wasn't a lot. I think a $75 gift card to treat him, and my Visa got stopped at the cashier. And I said, oh, that's kind of odd. And simultaneously, I received a text from TD asking me to confirm, are you doing a transaction for the $75 gift card? Confirm why with yes. So they were all over it. And I guess it really does trigger, and it goes to show the advancements in credit card security. So there's my own example. I'd love to hear your examples, and a couple stories are coming in, and I appreciate you sending these in. Text me at 514-800. A few of you have already sent some on the Life Unrehearsed Facebook page, and I want to hear from you. 514-790-0800. Here is one story that came in as we're listening to Life Unrehearsed here on Sunday, and we're talking frauds and scams and prevention techniques. We had a grandparent scam that was detailed for me on the Facebook page, and I'm going to read it out. Very interesting, very typical. This comes from David in Montreal, 80 years old. I got a call one day from what sounded like a teenager or young man who said it was my favorite grandson. After a few guesses, we narrowed it down to, well, it must be Liam, my grandson living outside of Atlanta. He said he was in trouble and please promise I wouldn't tell his parents. He went on to explain he had a traffic accident in Atlanta, Georgia. Because the woman driving the other vehicle was injured, she was taken to the hospital and Liam was taken to jail. The judge had assessed bail at $2,000 US plus another $2,000 US until the extent of medical bills to the other driver was clear. Could you imagine? I mean, Adrian White just finished saying on the first quarter this exact scenario. They arranged with a bank in Aruba to send the money directly to the bank to keep his and his parents' name out of the papers and off the no-fly list. They took advantage of a Canadian and American situation here. So I sent $4,000 using a money transfer service they recommended. $4,000 gone, just like that. But that wasn't all. The next day, they told Liam the mother in the hospital that was in the accident had lost her baby. The judge wanted another $4,000 US to ensure all the mother's hospital bills were covered. That day, I went to see the police. They contacted the bank in Aruba and discovered the whole thing had been a scam. I was out over $4,000, all because I thought I had my grandson's best interest in mind. I wanted to get him out of jail ASAP. Beware of imposters and fishy stories. It would probably be smart to check in with the police before you send any money. So, David, thank you for your honesty and transparency for telling this story, your very typical grandparent scam. Just tugging on the heartstrings. A couple reminders of what Adrian White said from the Canadian Bankers Association. Have that conversation with your kids, your spouses, your older ones. Have a code word. There's nothing wrong with having a code word. And, hang up the phone and ask to call back. And then call your grandchildren and have that code word ready to make sure that everything is legitimate. Listening to Life Unrehearsed, we're talking frauds and scams. I'm going to get in hopefully two real quick ones. One is actually from a university student, Ashley. She recently finished university, and I wanted to, this is another story on Facebook that I had put out on my Life Unrehearsed Facebook page. I wanted to sell my university books, which I did online. We agreed upon a price of $400. The buyer sent $800. I contacted the buyer and said they had made a mistake and sent $400 too much. So we had agreed that I would e-transfer the extra $400 back to the buyer. And then the very next day, the original $800 e-transfer was reversed by the bank because of insufficient funds. So could you imagine being a student, out $400, trying to do the good deed, and a complete scam aimed at university students? I have one more quick one. Barbara writes in, my sister was victim to identity fraud. To cut a long story short, apparently people at a government office were selling personal information to someone who in turn used all her details. We're talking date of birth, social insurance number, salary, place of work, residence, car, goes on. And they set up credit cards in her name, made many long-distance calls on these credit cards to Africa, Asia, Europe, to the tune of thousands of dollars. The alert that something was wrong came from a lady at the bank to inquire about my sister's application for a Visa credit card with them. I think not. The authorities ended up arresting an individual for these and many other crimes. The police actually found thousands of credit cards ready to be used, applications, and on. It came to within a hair that my sister's social insurance number was going to be charged. Barbara, thank you for sharing that story of identity fraud. That's just one of the things that we talked about when we were talking with Adrian White, who's a Director of Financial Crimes at the Canadian Bankers Association. And, one of the things he said, have the code words ready, have the discussion with your family and your friends. And it's just an excellent fraud prevention toolkit. Just look up CBA, that stands for Canadian Bankers Association, Fraud Prevention Toolkit. There's a bunch there, including those for older adults. Well, thank you very much for sharing these very concerning stories. Have your guard up. Be suspicious. Don't be afraid to hang up and ask for a number to call back, and watch it out there. Next up on Life Unrehearsed, being diagnosed with cancer can be traumatic. And if that diagnosis is multiple myeloma, the chances of survival would traditionally be minimal. Ron Drennan got this exact diagnosis more than 10 years ago, and he is still going strong at 77. We're going to hear his story. That's coming up after a CTV News update.